And joining us now is Republican Congressman McCaul of Texas. He serves on the Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security committees. He was also our guest at the White House Correspondents Dinner last night. Chairman, first of all, how are you? And the first thing I want to ask you is, we spent a lot of time standing in that well after this all happened last night. When you went about the dinner last night, do you think there was enough security there? You've been there before. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, let's put my chairman of Homeland Security hat on. I was a former counterterrorism federal prosecutor. I would say the Secret Service did an amazing job. Capitol Police escorted the members out in emergency vehicles. But the outer perimeter, if you will, was very free access. It's an open hotel. And I think that was part of the risk involved here if you had to analyze it. It's very difficult to harden that kind of environment. When you have the president coming in, what I was sort of amazed, you had the president and the vice president at the head table and the speaker. So you had the line of succession right there. If a bomb had gone off or something more dramatic, it would fall to Chuck Grassley, amazingly.
After this took place, you thanked Secret Service and the Capitol Police for squiring you and your congressional colleagues out of the room. Something Joe Matthew brought up a few minutes ago is what it was like to see those security officials on stage, yes, with weapons, but then how Secret Service, those law enforcement knew exactly where everybody was. There was an eerie quiet in this space. But talk a bit about that, what you were thinking as you watched all of that unfold, because I confess, from where I was sitting, we were beginning to eat. There was some commotion, and then it became very, very quiet in the room.
Well, I heard 3 gunshots, so I knew something was horribly wrong. And you're not quite sure what's going to happen after that, right? And I saw the president being taken off the stage, Secret Service jumping up on the stage with their weapons pointed towards the audience. And it was surreal, it's not an ordinary event. Unfortunately, it's becoming too commonplace in this country, but they went into action very quickly and escorted the cabinet members out of the room. But you don't know what's going to happen quite after that. I didn't know if we're going to have like an AR-15 and a spray of bullets, and are we going to be diving under the tables? And fortunately, we heard the 3 gunshots, and that was the end of it. This country's getting too violent, and the rhetoric needs to tone down, in my opinion. I was at Texas A&M talking about civility and politics just this last week with Henry Cuellar, a Democrat, talking about, how we can agree to disagree, but with civility. And I think last night's a good lesson for all of us. And, amazingly, the press, right? We were celebrating the First Amendment and the freedom of the press, and the press were there along with Republicans and Democrats all together celebrating our Constitution. And the First Amendment does not allow for political violence.
We were talking about the First Amendment, but it often comes into contradiction, it seems, with the Second Amendment, especially when your party votes on issues. They've been very reticent more and more. We were talking about Jim Brady and the Brady bill. That was the Reagan administration. This is a current Republican climate in which almost any gun control, even logical gun control, is impossible to get passed. Is that something your party should reevaluate, given what you just talked about, the heated political rhetoric and the violence that we're seeing?
It's interesting. As I was talking to your CEO right next to me about this very issue before the shooting, and when I met with Michael Bloomberg and he donated my campaign, this is many years ago, he said, "You're from Texas, and where are you on guns, right?" And we were having this conversation that, of course, the weapons purchased, I think he had it wasn't like an AR-15, it wasn't. I used to prosecute gun cases. A lot of them were stolen. But there has to be a way to, usually after the fact, flags come up. Like, I knew this guy and I thought there was a problem, but they don't report it until after. And I had to build like a fusion center to capture the red flags and then be able to act beforehand, or at least provide more security if there's a threat out there. So I think there is room for improvement here. I don't think you're going to see my party, infringing on the Second Amendment per se. But there are certain weapons under the 1968 Gun Control Act, like fully automatic machine guns that are, and that was an outgrowth of, Robert Kennedy. Of course, you had JFK assassinated in the 60s, Robert Kennedy, and then you had Martin Luther King. And we had that legislation in 1968. That's the last time we've done that.
Chairman Emeritus mentioned Michael Bloomberg, of course, the majority shareholder of Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg News. Want to get that out there.
Disclaimer there.
I want to ask you about what Homeland Security is going to do next year, the Committee on Homeland Security. Will there be an investigation, do you think? What questions do you have about the way in which all of this unfolded? I think a lot of us took note of the way that security was set up. You rightly bring up the fact this was an open hotel. There were guests there totally unaffiliated with right. this dinner. What do you want to see investigated in terms of what that perimeter was like, how fortified it was?
I think we have to. We have to take a look at the outer perimeter. Now, as I understand, he was a guest at the hotel. So anytime you have a big event like that, and it's known as the Hinckley Hotel because in 1981 Reagan was shot there, so it has a bit of a checkered past, and so I do think we'll be analyzing that. I think also it just reemphasizes how important it is to fully fund the Department of Homeland Security and stop this nonsense of a shutdown of a very important agency within our federal government.
Still partially shut down.
It is.
What is your take on the appropriateness of the president's Truth Social post that we just saw this morning and everything we've talked about, violence, political rhetoric, that the president is focusing on building a ballroom? What's your take on that?
Well, let me say first, I think his remarks last night were very gracious towards the press, and to both Democrats and Republican alike. I'm glad he took the high road in the rhetoric, which I think needs to be addressed. The ballroom, I was in the East Wing and he pointed to it. It's a big hole in the ground. It's going to have a lot of security features to it in the basement. But I think, as was pointed out earlier, this is a private association. It's not, that's a federal building, essentially. So I don't know. I mean, I think it would certainly be a lot more secure if it was done at a place like that. The next time the president shows up, I think they're going to tighten up security even more so on the outer perimeter. And again, the line of secession all being there at the same time, I think we ought to take a look at that as well.
Is that concerning? Is that something Congress should investigate?
Yeah, of course. I was really shocked that the president and vice president were at the table together.
Surprise.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the rhetoric, and I'm curious how hotter rhetoric has shaped the way that you approach your job. Is it something that you give more thought to? God forbid something like this were to happen. How has it shaped the way that you and your colleagues in Congress approach the job? We've seen some reticence to attend town hall meetings if they get pretty fractious.
Yeah.
Who knows what might happen? What are the consequences on a day-to-day basis for having the kind of heated rhetoric that we have in this country today?
Well, we're a reflection of the American people, and there is a violent rhetoric out there. But we don't have to be an echo chamber for that. And the irony was I was just at this symposium at a university in my district where we talked about this very issue and how it needs to be. I've been up there 22 years up here, and it's changed for the worse. And it's okay to go on social media and say vile things about the other party and other members of Congress and the president.
But isn't some of that coming from the top down? Isn't the president partly to blame for that?
Well, I think we're probably all to blame. And you know what happens when these things occur? Everybody says the right things for a couple of days, and then I'll give this a couple of weeks, and we're going to be right back at this violent rhetoric out there, and it doesn't seem to change. You can't legislate that. That is a conduct issue. It's a moral clarity issue. And I think the institution is weakened and hurt by, and politics in general are hurt by this violent rhetoric that is out there today. And I hope members do reflect on this. The ones that want their 5 minutes of fame on YouTube and social media, I hope they reflect. It's not how I conduct myself. I wasn't raised that way. It's on my value system. I show respect for people that have other opinions. And that's what democracy is all about. That's what the press, the First Amendment, freedom of speech and press is all about. And we got to respect each other a little bit more. Last night, I've been in war zones in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I've, heard mortar shells and,
Ukraine,
rounds of ammunition. I'm going to Ukraine and this summer and, drones and all that kind of stuff. But you don't expect that, at the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C.
Do you have confidence in who's going to be leading this investigation prosecution? So Kash Patel, not somebody who has a traditional background for somebody running the FBI. Mark Wayne Mullen just taking this job over as DHS secretary. Should we be at all worried about those individuals' capacity to see this through?
Well, they're the figurehead. I do think, like when I was a federal prosecutor, the line FBI agents, line Secret Service, they've been doing this for many years. They're professional, and they know how to conduct this. I'm a little surprised we don't know anything more about the shooter, to be honest with you, other than he took a train, which I think is very strange. He had a couple of weapons and knives. You were there last night, Christina. We were at the table together.
Yeah.
Somehow he runs in. He gets pretty darn close to the ballroom, and then we heard the gunshots. And so, yeah, there were a lot of unanswered questions. I didn't know if it was going to be like in Austin, Texas. We had the property of Allah Islamist terrorist. It doesn't look like that's the case here, and I don't know what motivates somebody to do something like this, and we don't know the answer to that right now.
Very quickly before I let you go, you said you think Congress should look into why all the cabinet officials were there, the last survivor issue. But I'm wondering if you think there should be a congressional investigation into what we've been talking about, how he got that far, the perimeter, and the security precautions around the president.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And we will. And I think the Homeland Security Committee will be charged with that responsibility. But I do, let's not lose fact that the Secret Service immediately popped up in the room, went into action, and the Capitol Police. So I'm very proud of what they did.